This is the first in a planned series of videos I intend to make on my Commodore computer collection, and for the first one I want to do the Amiga 500. And the reason I want to do the 500 first is it is the first computer that I actually owned. I became a fan of the Amigas as a little kid when my family had a Commodore SX64, and I learned how to program BASIC on it, and through reading the trade magazines such as Compute's Gazette and Run, I read about this new Amiga computer from Commodore and all of its fascinating technical abilities, and really wanted to own one someday. So as soon as I became old enough and got a job and saved up some money, I bought an Amiga 500. And here's a picture of me with my new Amiga 500, a proud young man there. Of course, obviously a teenager with the lovely ladies on the wall and the mullet starting to blossom nicely there. The Amiga 500 was one of two Amiga models released by Commodore in 1987, and it was the result of a decision to split the Amiga line into two levels. The original Amiga computer had been released 2 years earlier and hadn't been selling as well as Commodore had probably wanted. And part of the reason was most likely due to the fact that it was priced a little bit out of the average home user's budget. So what Commodore did was split the Amiga into two different machines. The original Amiga would be called the Amiga 1000, and then the two new machines would be called the Amiga 2000 and the Amiga 500. The 2000 would be the high-end expandable machine, and the 500 would be the slim, cost-reduced entry-level machine. The Amiga 500, even though having a much lower cost than the original Amiga at only $595 when it was originally released, it had mostly identical specs to the original Amiga, with actually a couple of improvements. It had twice as much stock memory, it had half a megabyte of memory as standard, and it also had the kickstart portion of the operating system on a ROM chip rather than on a floppy, as had been the case with the original Amiga computer. The main CPU is a Motorola 68000 running at 7 megahertz. Of course, it has the standard Amiga coprocessors, Fat Agnes, Denise and Paula. Fat Agnes was a newer version of the Agnes chip from the Amiga 1000, which was able to handle more memory. It had the same 4-voice, 2-channel stereo sound, a 4096 color palette in various arbitrary screen resolutions up to 640 by 512. Okay, I've connected the system up here, and a monitor and a mouse and the power supply. The Amiga 500's power switch was on the power supply. On the back here, a little rocker switch. So you turn that switch on, and then the power comes on, and you'll see the light come on there, and then the screen will display. Now the kickstart portion of the operating system is in ROM, but it still needs an OS disk in order to get anywhere. So you would typically insert an Amiga Workbench disk. I've got a backup copy here which we'll put in. And one nice thing about the Amiga floppies is they would instantly recognize that you'd put a disk in there and start loading. Now, of course, the downside to the Amiga hardware is that all of these early 80s and mid-80s Amigas had no internal hard drive as standard, so you were using floppy disks pretty much exclusively, unless you happened to buy a third-party hard drive or mod the machine and put an internal hard drive in there. Hard drives being as expensive as they were in the mid-80s, most people didn't have hard drives. What they would do instead is put a second floppy drive on the machine to reduce the amount of disk swapping, because if you were doing any kind of computing, you would occasionally, the machine would occasionally need to refer back to the Workbench disk, and you'd have to keep swapping that disk with the other disk you were using. So as you can see here, this is the desktop Workbench, as it's called in the Amiga world. So here you can see it's a Workbench 1.2. It's actually slightly off to the side here on my screen for some reason. But if we double click that, here will be the contents of this disk. The preferences utility is here if you want to change the shape of the mouse pointer or the colors on the screen. And this is the standard OS resolution of 640 by 200. And it's a 4-color display, but those 4 colors can be any of the 4096 colors of the computer's palette, and you can change them just by moving the slider. And you can see as I move the slider, the color will gradually change. The red value will change here, the green, and then the blue. And by adjusting these sliders, you could get yourself any of the 4096 possible colors for the display you wanted to use. And we can just make maybe we'll make kind of a green color for the highlight here instead of the orange. See, that changes to green there. So if you like the way that looks, I think I want to make the mouse move a little faster here. It seems like it's moving slow. I think 4, is that fast? No, 4 is slower. 1 is faster. There we go. So if you want to use that configuration, we just click Use, and here we go. So here are some demos that come with the OS disk here. Just some really quick little graphics demos, nothing very exciting. Dots, just draw some dots on the screen. But this was actually, believe it or not, used as a demonstration of the Amiga's ability to multitask. You could open up multiple programs here, and of course these were all running in their own separate windows and own separate processes, drawing random shaped deals on in the window they were in, and they all ran in their own window. And you could double click them and open up more and more, and the thing would multitask. Of course, you can see it's starting to slow down significantly as the 7 megahertz processor starts to struggle to keep up with the multitasking here. But it was certainly a multitasking machine, and if the programs were not too memory intensive, you could actually do quite a lot. It had a RAM disk too, which was kind of interesting for a computer with only a half mega RAM standard to have a RAM disk. But if you keep in mind that a system that's primarily floppy based, with the floppy access times being what they were, you could copy commonly used tools or programs into the RAM disk and speed things up considerably. The RAM disk, of course, was dynamic. It was always 100% full. It would just adjust size to whatever you put in there. So, for example, if I want to put some of these demos into the RAM disk, all you would do is just copy the icon, drag it in there, and it would copy into the RAM disk. And now I can run it from RAM, which of course loads a lot faster than it does from the floppy. And here is a neat little utility called Say. We'll open it up here. It'll open up a couple of windows and show you some of the options here. In the input window, you could type in a phrase, hit enter,
Hello YouTube,
and it would speak.
I am the Amiga 500.
And of course now some of the phonetics, which it would display up here, you might have to adjust the spelling a little bit to get it to actually pronounce things properly. We'll try that.
I am the Amiga 500.
That's a little bit better. This was actually kind of a useful utility because you could have your word processor read your document back to you. So for people that were, had visual impairments, it was actually a kind of a handy tool in some cases. Another nice thing about the Amiga operating system was the CLI, or the command line interface. This is just like typing in CMD or opening a command prompt in Windows. You open this up and it opens up a window that gives you the Amiga DOS window, and then your standard DOS commands like directory, of course reading off a floppy takes a while. One of the things that was kind of unique about the Amiga operating system was the ability to pull down the screen and see what was behind it, and it was extremely fast. I mean, this is just so smooth for such a slow machine, 7 megahertz processor, and it's because of the custom graphics chips, being designed specifically to do that kind of thing. The purpose of this would be you could have several screens with completely different screen modes running, different resolutions, different color palettes, and everything running at the same time, and you could slide this one down, and if there was another screen there, the mouse would slide into the other screen resolution, and you could then flip it to the front with the front and back gadgets here, and bring that screen to the front if you wanted to, but you could kind of keep an eye on stuff that was running in the background by pulling that down, and I'll display that, I'll demonstrate that in another video.